Today, we're talking about night vision because... So I have been working with image-enhanced photography and videography for some time, and I've learned a ton in that time. But there's one thing that pops up almost every single time I go out under the IR, and that is that an object or device designed to look a particular way under visible light can have a completely different signature under IR. And I think at a basic level we understand how this works, at least if you got decent grades in high school science. Light comes in, it hits an object or a surface, a portion of that light is reflected at your eye, and then your retina picks up those signals, your brain spatially reasons those signals, and then you basically can define where that object is in three-dimensional space. That's how it works. Well, when you start working in a spectrum of light that your eye was never designed to see, well, things get a little bit wonky.
It's smoky down here.
I remember my first introduction to this phenomenon. It was like 15 years ago at this point in time. Wow, that sounds bad. I was out on a hunting trip. I believe it was for bear in Ontario. And I walked in front of a game camera at night, and I looked like a glowing beacon. And my friend that was right next to me looked camouflage. The difference was his clothes had been sitting in the same bin for like 15 years in fox urine, etc. Reeked to high heaven. But anyway, beside the point, my clothes were actually brand new, and because they were brand new, I went out and washed them because I didn't want them to smell like store. I used an unscented detergent, but apparently it had UV enhancers in it, and I looked like just a glowing sheet, and nobody else was having that problem. And that was the first time that I had ever seen that happen, and it absolutely fascinated me at the time. And ever since then, whenever I see something like this pop up, I'm just elated that this is what's going on. Now, what I thought we would do today is go out and test paints against some night vision. But before we hop into the details, we need to hear a word from our sponsor, which is Sonoran Desert Institute. Have you ever thought about pursuing a career in the firearms industry, or perhaps wanted to learn more about a particular discipline as it relates to guns? Maybe you've just suddenly found yourself with an overabundance of time and you're rethinking your life and how you got here. If any of that is you, then perhaps an educational foundation might be something you want to look into. Sonoran Desert Institute is a DEAC accredited online college focusing on programs and courses pertinent to firearms. So if you're into gun repair, ballistics, or learning about firearms, SDI might be something you want to look into. They even have funding plans and payment options available for anybody who doesn't have a pile of money laying around, like most of us. To catch up with them, you can find them at sdi.edu, or you can call them directly for more information at 1-800-MESO. Sorry about that. I'll have the number listed in the description box down below. Special thanks to SDI for making today's video possible. Now, as far as the imagery that you guys are going to be seeing, you're going to be seeing images filmed through my Generation 3 white phosphor PVS-14, and that is going to be mounted on my Hard-Headed Veterans ATE ballistic helmet. I should have a full video coming out on that in relative short order, so if you want to see a comparison between a nice helmet and a filthy poor helmet, then make sure that you are subbed up and ring that notification bell. Now, before we go anywhere, I need to explain that just because we're talking about night vision and darkness does not mean that black is necessarily the answer. Tan could be the answer, and to explain that, I want to show you guys a quick image here. These are two cans. One is Cerakoted black, one is Cerakoted tan, and backdrop absolutely does matter. So if you are against a dark background, then black is what you're after. If you're against a light background, then black is going to make you stick out like a sore thumb. That's not really what we are talking about here today. What I want to see is what happens as far as the reaction to light is concerned. So what happens when a light source comes in, hits that surface, and then reports back to the night vision device. So to do that, I had some old blanks left over from a previous plot project. These are just blank aluminum discs. And so I have a control and then 5 paints that we're going to compare. And those paints are as follows. The first one is just whatever the cheapest crap I could buy at Lowe's was. 89 cents for this gloss black bottle of spray paint. Next up is Krylon's textured black, followed by Krylon's matte black, followed by Krylon's chalkboard paint, and then to mix it up a little bit, I wanted to go with Rust-Oleum, and this one is super popular in my family because we're a farm. High heat black. I think we've all painted something high heat black. And I went with black because it had the greatest selection. They were like 2 bottles of tan spray paint at my Lowe's, and that just wasn't good enough. I also cherry picked the specific night that we filmed because it was supposed to be scattered showers all night, overcast, so no moon whatsoever, and the ground was going to be very reflective because it was going to rain for like 10 minutes and then shut off for like 45, so I could go out there, had plenty of time to film, but the ground would be wet and you would be able to see what that reflectivity looked like against a wet surface versus our samples that we're going to be testing. But to state, it was not raining during the test. Samples were completely dry and they were mounted on a piece of cardboard. So the first thing I wanted to see is how they did with supplemental visible light. And this is because there are very few instances where you're going to have complete darkness. Even on a starless night, in most environments, you're going to have some kind of supplemental light. So to simulate that, I turned on my yard security light about 40 yards away from the area that we were filming. And it's not a very bright light. And I took a shot with my iPhone 12 so you guys could see what it looked like to the naked eye. First off, I wanted to see what they look like tangentially oriented. Basically, samples 4 and 5 look terrible, as in just as bad, if not worse, than the uncoated sample. Then I moved them and set them up so that their faces were perpendicular to the light source. Again, 4 and 5 still performed pretty badly. But I would also say that 2 isn't performing optimally in this orientation as well. Then I moved them to a more oblique angle and changed my orientation to the worst position I could find. Paint 1 and 3 are still looking pretty good. Next, I found a spot behind my truck that casts a deep shadow on the lee side of the house so we could protect ourselves from that overhead light that was shining. As you can see, the gain is much higher here because there's very, very little light in that shadow. I then tried to use the integrated illuminator on the PVS-14, but there was something in the way and I really couldn't figure out what in my setup was in front of the light, so I basically just abandoned it and went for my Purst. Speaking of which, I want to pause for a moment so you can see why this actually matters. I know this shot is a little fuzzy, but look at how different the materials are acting. That is a black nylon strap on the side of a SBA3 brace, and you can see that it's giving off quite a signature. The polymer Magpul grip looks fairly flat, and the gun is done in gray Cerakote. But the can is anodized, and you can see this giving off quite a signature. This is very similar to things that I've seen in the past, and specifically that whole fabric thing that I discussed earlier. If you guys would like to see a dedicated video on different types of clothing, different fabrics and things like that that play or don't play well with night vision, then sound off in the comment section down below and we'll see what we can do. Anyway, I put the Purst on the IR illuminator mode and put it on its lowest setting. Obviously, pointing it directly at the samples would blow everything out, so I played around bouncing the IR off the ground onto the surfaces. And then I moved it closer and closer until it became washed out. Now let's review those findings and see which ones performed the worst. 4 and 5, I believe, performed the worst, and 4 was the chalkboard paint, and 5 was the high heat black from Rust-Oleum. Now, quick caveat, none of these were primered, because I believe the high heat black requires no primer. I believe they want you to apply that directly to the surface. But I wanted to put no primer on these things because I just wanted the paint. I didn't want any bleed through from the primer. So I put 3 coats on all of these discs to make sure that they were properly coated. And then we performed the test. Also, the thing about high heat black, if anybody has used high heat black before, it's got a different finish when you first paint it than when it gets really hot. So I was actually a little bit surprised that it performed so poorly. I would be interested to get something really hot after painting it with that and see if it changes the structure any, because we've all seen this before. It's a little bit more matte after you baked it a few times. But anyway, I digress. Now, of the 3 other paints that we tested, I think that the 2 that performed the best was the matte black finish Krylon and the absolute bullcrap paint, like the cheapest crap that I could buy, performed the best. The other one, the textured black, there were just a few instances where it gave off some glare, and it was kind of one of those things where it actually did worse, I believe, the more IR light we introduced to it. But basically, that crappy paint, that 89-cent a can paint, and then the textured, or not the textured, the matte black from Krylon did pretty good versus all the tests that we threw at it. Krylon had nothing to do. Rust-Oleum had nothing to do with this. I paid for all the paint myself, went to the store and just bought it because I was very interested in this. And yes, ideally, I would say that you would probably just Cerakote it. But there's a lot of stuff out there that you can't bake, and there's a lot of stuff out there that Cerakote in large quantities can be prohibitively expensive. So keep that in mind, that if you're just trying to mass do something, hey, that Krylon, it's looking pretty good. Well, that's going to wrap us up for today. I hope that you guys found today's video interesting and informative. If you did, then the best thing that you can do to help out is to sound off in the comment section down below. The way it works, for anybody who doesn't know, is interaction with the video means leaps and bounds to the algorithm. Basically what that says is that you thought it was cool enough or interesting enough or it was thought-provoking enough to elicit a response from you for you to give a few seconds of your time to write something. Now, the next thing that you can do to help out is obviously to subscribe and click that notification bell so you'll see when we upload something new. And if you have ideas for future videos, then make sure you leave those down below as well, and I'll see if I can get to them. Special thanks to all our supporters over on Patreon that meet the different classifications. Thank you very much for your support and keeping this stuff free. And again, thank you to SDI for making today's video possible.